On my 18th birthday, my stepsister falsely accused me of forcing myself on her. My stepdad kicked me out of the house and called me disgusting. A year later, her friend exposed her lies. They lost everything, and I took them to court for defamation. Hey Reddit, my stepdad always treated me like an outsider, and my stepsister could do no wrong. I tried to keep the peace, but their lies blew up my whole life. I lost everything because of them, but that wasn't the end. Let me start from the beginning. My name's Jake. I'm 17, finishing my last year of high school. I live with my mom, Laura, my stepdad, Greg, and his daughter, Sophie. We've been under the same roof for about 5 years now, but it's never really felt like home. Mom and Greg married a year after my dad passed away. She says it was about stability, but to me it's felt more like walking on glass ever since. Greg always acts like he's right. He calls it discipline. I call it control. He works in sales and brings that performance home. Every talk turns into a lecture about respect and attitude. If I roll my eyes, it's an hour-long speech about responsibility, while mom quietly picks at her nails. Sophie's 16 and perfect in their eyes. When she gets a B, Greg calls it great effort. When I get an A, he says, try to keep it up. She's the golden one. Charming, popular, untouchable. Everyone outside loves her, and everyone inside pretends to. I work part-time fixing bikes at a local shop. The owner pays cash and lets me take old parts. I use them to build small furniture in the basement. My one quiet place. It smells like sawdust, but it's mine. Greg says I'm wasting time and should build character instead, even though he spends hours watching motivational videos. Mom tries to keep the peace. She's exhausted after work, too tired to argue. So when Greg calls me lazy, she just nods. It's easier for her to agree than to stand up for me. One Saturday night, I was cleaning up the basement and found this old box tucked behind some paint cans. It was full of random stuff. My dad's old wallet, a few photos, and an envelope with my name on it. The postmark was from about a month before he died. I sat down on the floor and opened it carefully. It was short, written in his messy handwriting. He wrote about working with his hands, about how some people build things that last and others just talk about doing it. He told me to always build something, even if it's small, because it means you're still moving forward. Then he ended it with, build things that last, even when people don't. That line hit me like a brick. I must have read it 10 times. It's simple, but it stuck. I folded it up and slipped it in my wallet. The next morning at breakfast, Greg was in one of his moods. He'd been scrolling his phone, reading some article about raising strong sons. He looked at me and said, 17, right? You're not a kid anymore. Once you're 18, I expect you to act like it. I didn't answer, just kept eating. That only made him angrier. After breakfast, I went downstairs and started sanding an old chair I'd found by the curb. The smell of the wood made me feel better. I kept thinking about that letter, about how my dad's words made more sense than anything Greg ever said. Maybe that's what I was doing without realizing it. Maybe I was building something that was mine, something they couldn't break. Upstairs, I could hear Greg talking to Mom about setting boundaries, and Sophie laughing about something on her phone. The house always felt too small when they were all together. Downstairs, though, it felt like air again. I worked until my arms hurt, packed up, and went to bed thinking about getting out of there the second I turned 18. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like waiting for the next fight, the next rule, the next reason Greg would call me ungrateful. I didn't know it yet, but that night, sanding wood in the basement would be one of the last calm nights I'd have in that house. A couple weeks after Greg's act like a man speech, I started fixing up our neighbor's deck. It was old and splintered, and they didn't want to pay a contractor. I worked on it over a few weekends, just for extra money. When it was done, the neighbor posted photos online, saying I did a great job. People in the comments were asking for my number. It felt good to be recognized for something. Greg saw the post that night. He didn't say anything at first, just scrolled through his phone with that tight grin. Then he laughed and said, "You know, cleaning up rotten wood isn't exactly skilled work, Jake. Don't get too proud of janitor jobs." I just shrugged and said, "They paid me, didn't they?" He didn't like that. His face went stiff, and Mom changed the subject. He glanced at Sophie's phone. Even Jake's picking up work these days. Think about that, Soph. Her smile thinned. She locked her screen a little too hard. After that, the air in the house changed. Sophie had always been nice enough on the surface, but I started noticing little things. I'd leave a screwdriver on my workbench, and it would disappear. Or my tool battery would be drained, even though I hadn't used it. When I asked her about it, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Why would I touch your junk?" Then she started using my laptop when I wasn't home. I could tell because files were missing and my browser history was cleared. She'd say it must have been me forgetting. It was small stuff, but it built up fast. Around the same time, Greg started calling me careless. At first, I thought it was just more nagging, but then small things around the house went missing. A few dollars from the kitchen counter, a pack of gum, even Mom's charger cord. Each time, Sophie pointed it out when Greg was around. One night she said, "Dad, I swear I saw Jake take it. He said he'd return it later." Greg turned to me with that look, the one that says he's already decided I'm guilty. "You don't take what's not yours," he said. I said I didn't, but it didn't matter. Mom stepped in and said, "Let's just drop it," like she always did. Then came the mug. It was a Saturday morning. I was getting ready to go to work, and Sophie was mad that I'd left wood dust in the kitchen sink from cleaning brushes. She started yelling, saying I was disgusting and trashing the house. I told her to relax. She threw a sponge at me, and I walked out. 5 minutes later, I heard her scream my name. Greg came running upstairs, and she was crying, pointing at a broken mug on the floor. "He threw it at me," she said. "It almost hit me." Greg looked at the pieces and then at me. "You think this is a joke?" I told him I didn't touch her stupid mug. He didn't believe me. Mom came in from the hallway, asking what happened. Sophie said, "That was my favorite one. He knows it was." Mom didn't say much, just gave me that tired look. Greg said, "Break one more thing and you're done here." I didn't argue. It wouldn't matter. A few days later, Sophie made it worse. It started when she mentioned her silver necklace, the one Greg gave her for her birthday, was missing. She acted casual about it at first. Then that night she found it in my jacket pocket. Greg called me into the living room, holding it up like a police officer showing evidence. "Want to explain this?" he said. I was speechless. It made no sense. I hadn't even touched her room. I said, "You planted that." Sophie gasped like I'd insulted her honor. "Why would I do that?" she said, voice shaking. Mom tried to calm things down, but Greg wouldn't drop it. He said, "You're lucky I don't call the cops for theft." Mom ended up giving him some cash, saying, "It's fine, just forget it." That was her way of buying peace. Later that night, I checked Sophie's social media. She'd posted a black screen with text, "Imagine being scared in your own house." I stared at it for a while. She was setting me up for something, and I knew it. I just didn't know how far she'd take it. The next day, I came upstairs and heard Greg talking to her in the kitchen. He said, "You're smart, Soph. Don't end up like him. Don't waste your time on pity parties and excuses." She laughed softly. I stood in the hallway, listening, fists tight. Then I just went back to the basement. I started saving every bit of money I could from my job. I looked up cheap rooms for rent and part-time trade programs. My plan was simple: finish school, graduate, and leave the second I turned 18. At that point, it wasn't even about freedom anymore. It was about getting out before Greg finally found a reason to kick me out himself. Something told me he wouldn't need much of one. I thought the worst was over after the necklace thing, but I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got called into the principal's office. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't even want to be talking to me. He said there'd been a concern raised at school. When I asked what that meant, he said one of my teachers reported something after a student came forward. I knew right away who it was. Apparently, Sophie had gone to her English teacher and said she didn't feel safe at home. She told her that I had anger issues, that I'd broken her things, stolen from her, and sometimes stood outside her room at night. It sounded insane, but to a teacher, that's a big red flag. They have to file a report, even if they don't believe it. That's the rule. By the time I got home that afternoon, there were 2 police cars parked in front of the house. Greg was outside talking to the officers like he was the one who called them. He shook their hands, told them he understood, and said something about keeping the family safe. When I walked up the driveway, one of the cops stopped me and asked if I was Jacob Miller. I said yeah, and he asked if I'd come inside to talk. They said they were there for a domestic concern. I didn't even know what that meant. Mom was standing in the hallway, pale and silent. Sophie sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, like she was a victim in a TV drama. The officers asked if there'd been any recent fights or damaged property. Greg jumped in before I could say anything. "He's had anger problems since his father passed," he said, using that fake, sad voice he pulls out for strangers. "We've been trying to get him to manage it, but it's been tough." I snapped, "That's not true." But one of the cops put up a hand and said, "Let's just stay calm." They pulled me aside into the kitchen to ask questions privately. They wanted to know if I ever yelled at my family, broke anything on purpose, or took things that didn't belong to me. I told them no, that my stepsister was lying because she didn't like me. They looked at each other, then back at me. One of them said, "You sound frustrated, son. Maybe just give her space for a while." I wasn't arrested, but they made a report. They said it was just procedure. When they left, Greg walked me out onto the porch and said, "You just embarrassed this family in front of the whole neighborhood." I said, "You let them talk to me like I'm a criminal." He leaned in close and said quietly, "You're lucky they didn't take you with them." That night, the house felt different. Sophie stayed in her room, doors locked. Greg walked around like a warden, checking every noise. Mom didn't talk to me at all. I could tell she was scared, maybe not of me, but of Greg, of everything spiraling. The next day at school, the rumors had already started. Someone must have seen the police cars. People were whispering in the hallways. My best friend Tyler pulled me aside and said, "Dude, what happened? Everyone's saying you got reported for like violence or something." I told him it was lies, that Sophie made it all up. He nodded, but he didn't sound convinced. Later, he texted saying his parents didn't want me coming over for a while. At lunch, a couple of kids from my shop class looked at me like I was a freak. One of them said, "Didn't know you had a temper, man." I didn't bother explaining. It wouldn't change anything. When I got home, Greg was setting up a camera in the hallway. He said it was for everyone's safety. I said, "You're out of your mind." And he answered, "You brought this on yourself." Mom tried to get me to sit down and talk, but it was the same old thing. She said, "Just stay calm, Jake. Please, let's ride it out until this all blows over." I said, "You think this is going to blow over?" She called the cops. Mom rubbed her temples and said quietly, "I can't handle another scene." That was it. She walked away. Later that night, I checked my phone. Sophie had posted another cryptic message online. "You can't fake being safe." People in the comments were sending her hearts and saying things like, "Stay strong." I couldn't believe it. She was milking it for attention, and everyone was eating it up. That's when I realized logic wasn't going to fix anything. I could show proof, tell the truth, shout it from the roof. It wouldn't matter. Greg already saw me as a threat. Sophie was playing the victim, and Mom was too scared to pick a side. So I grabbed a notebook from my desk, wrote down the date, the time, and what the police said. Then I wrote down every detail I could remember from the past few weeks. The mug, the necklace, everything. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I needed some kind of record. By midnight, Greg had turned off the Wi-Fi for discipline. The house was quiet except for the creaking floors upstairs. I sat in my room under the desk lamp, flipping through the pages of the notebook, wondering how long before they found another reason to call the cops again. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound made me tense up. Every knock on the wall made me think Greg was about to open my door. That's when it hit me. I wasn't living in a house anymore. I was living in evidence. Outside the house, Sophie played the perfect victim. She acted shy around Greg's coworkers when they visited, and people felt bad for her. "She's been through a lot," they'd tell Greg. At school, she looked sad and fragile, but when we were alone, her mask dropped. She'd walk past me in the hallway whispering, "Everyone believes me," or "You look guilty, you know." I ignored her, but it still got under my skin. Mom stopped cooking dinner most nights. She started coming home late, saying work ran long. I knew she was sitting in her car in the driveway, stalling. I found bottles of prescription pills in her purse. Something for anxiety, probably. She was there physically, but it felt like she'd left months ago. Greg started talking like he was the head of a correctional facility. He taped a schedule to the fridge with everyone's chores listed, highlighted mine in red. He said it was accountability. He installed small security cameras in the hallway, one near the stairs, another in the kitchen. He told me it was for everyone's protection. I knew it was just another way to monitor me. I wasn't allowed to have my phone in my room anymore. Greg kept it in the living room at night to avoid distractions. The Wi-Fi password changed every week, and I had to ask him for it each time. When I asked why, he said, "Because you need to earn trust." Sophie's act worked. Whenever Greg was home, she acted timid, jumping when I entered a room. When he wasn't, she'd blast music, laugh, and humiliate me under her breath. Once I came into the kitchen to grab water, and she said, "You should be careful. You already have one strike with the cops." Then she smiled and walked away. At night, when everyone was asleep, I'd go down to the basement and work. It was the only place left that felt like mine. I built small things. A stool, a box, anything that kept my hands busy. The smell of sawdust calmed me more than any words could. The noise of sanding helped drown out the feeling that I was being watched. One night, Greg came down unannounced. I was working on a small coffee table I'd made from scrap wood. He stood there watching me for a while before saying, "You think this fixes your reputation? Playing handyman doesn't make you a good person." I didn't answer. I just kept sanding. He pointed at the table. "What's in there?" "What?" He stepped closer, tapped the underside. "You hiding something in this?" "Sophie's jewelry, maybe." You think I don't know how you operate? I told him it was solid wood. No drawers, nothing hidden. He didn't believe me. He grabbed a hammer from the workbench and smashed one of the legs clean off. Wood split. Pieces fell everywhere. He kicked the rest over, breathing heavy like he'd won something. If he'd really thought I was hiding jewelry, he would have sifted through the splinters, but he didn't even look. It wasn't about finding anything. It was a show. Next time I find you sneaking around, you're gone, he said, and walked upstairs. I stood there staring at the broken table. That piece had taken me days to finish. I swept up the pieces quietly and dumped them in the trash. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just done. Mom came down later that night, eyes red. She saw the wrecked table and whispered, "Please don't provoke him." "I didn't do anything," I said. "I know," she said, then looked away. "But it's easier if you just stay quiet." That was the last time she came downstairs. For the next few weeks, Greg barely talked to me unless it was to give orders. Sophie avoided me in front of him, but kept posting online about healing and trust. Some people commented, "You're so brave. It made me sick." Every day I circled the date on my phone's calendar, my 18th birthday. That was my countdown, my way out. I started collecting the few tools I could hide in an old backpack. My hammer, some sandpaper, the letter from my dad. Each night I reminded myself, just make it to 18. No arguing, no reacting, no mistakes. The basement became my cell, but also my plan. I didn't know what would happen after I left. I didn't care anymore. All I knew was that I'd walk out on my birthday and never come back. My 18th birthday came and went like any other day. No one said a word at breakfast. Mom made coffee. Greg sat in silence reading the news on his phone. Sophie walked past me with her headphones in. The house felt colder than usual. I remember thinking, this is it. I'm finally legal, and I can leave. I just needed to get through one more day without starting anything. That afternoon, I was packing a few of my tools into my duffel bag. I planned to take them to the shop after school and leave them there, just in case Greg tried something. Around 5, I heard a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, Sophie was standing there holding a screwdriver. She smiled, the first time in months. "Hey," she said, "my desk is wobbly. Can you help me fix it? I don't want Dad to see it's broken." Every part of me said no, but I didn't want another fight. I figured it'd take 5 minutes. "Fine," I said. "Where is it?" She led me to her room, chatting about random stuff like nothing had ever happened. I kept my eyes on the desk, tightening the screws. She was pacing behind me, fidgeting with her phone. Then I heard her gasp. Before I could turn around, she screamed. Loud. "Dad! Help!" My heart jumped. Greg's footsteps thundered down the hall, followed by Mom's voice yelling, "What happened?" I spun around, confused, and saw Sophie sitting on the floor crying. Her face was red, and she clutched her neck like she'd been hurt. When Greg burst in, Sophie was clutching her throat, insisting she'd been hurt. "What did you do?" he shouted. "Nothing," I said. Sophie pointed at me, shaking. "He tried to force himself on me," she cried. "When I said no, he grabbed my neck." Everything froze. Greg's face twisted with rage. He charged at me and shoved me against the wall. "You disgusting piece of garbage!" he yelled. "After everything we did for you." Mom tried to step in, but he pushed her aside. "Get out of my house before I kill you," he screamed, grabbing his phone. I tried to speak, but he was already calling the police. Mom stood in the doorway crying, asking Sophie if she was okay. Sophie wouldn't look at me. She just kept sobbing. The sound of Greg's voice filled the room. "Yes, I want to report an assault. My stepdaughter. He's dangerous." When the police arrived, the flashing lights lit up the street. Neighbors came out, standing on their porches. 2 officers separated us immediately. One took Greg's statement, while the other led me outside. I tried explaining, telling them it was a setup, that nothing happened. The officer nodded but didn't say much. He asked if I'd ever put my hands on her. I said no, never. He said, "Just stay calm." They logged another incident and cleared the scene. One officer said they didn't have probable cause. Our stories clashed, there were no visible injuries, and Sophie wouldn't give a formal statement right then. They documented it and said the ER notes would matter if this turned into a case. After the police left, Greg turned to me and said, "You're done here. Pack your things." He went inside and came back with my duffel bag, the one I'd already started filling. He threw it at my feet. "You're out. Don't come back." I didn't bother packing the rest. Mom didn't say anything. I looked at her one last time, but she couldn't meet my eyes. Greg shouted again, "Get off my property!" I picked up the bag, walked past them, and kept going down the driveway. The street was full of people pretending not to stare. I walked until I couldn't see the house anymore. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't scared, just numb. I didn't even know where I was headed. At the bus station, I bought the cheapest ticket I could find with the cash I had. It was to a small city a few hours away. The waiting area was mostly empty. I sat on a plastic bench with my bag between my feet and pulled out the folded letter from my dad. The paper was soft from being opened too many times. I read the last line again. Build things that last, even when people don't. I must have read it 100 times while the station lights buzzed overhead. Outside, a stray dog was walking circles near the vending machine. The place smelled like burnt coffee and rain. My bus wasn't leaving for hours, so I just sat there. When the bus finally pulled in, I climbed aboard and sat near the back. The driver nodded but didn't say much. I watched the lights outside the window blur as the bus rolled away. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like distance. I never finished that term at school. I withdrew the next week from a library computer and never went back. The bus dropped me off in a small industrial town 3 hours from home. I didn't know anyone there, but that was the point. I found a cheap room above a garage on the edge of town. The landlord barely looked up from his paperwork when I handed him cash. The room smelled like oil and old carpet, but it was quiet. That was all I needed. 2 days later, I got a job at a carpenter's shop called Keller's Woodworks. The owner, Mr. Keller, was an older guy with a gray beard and permanent scowl. He didn't ask for references, just looked me up and down and said, "You know how to use a broom?" I said, "Yeah." "Good," he said. "You start tomorrow." At first, all I did was sweep sawdust, clean tools, and carry wood from the back lot. Keller barely spoke to me except to bark orders. He was strict but fair. The shop was old, full of heavy machinery, and the smell of pine and varnish. I liked it there. No shouting, no lies, just work. I didn't talk to anyone after hours. I'd grab food from the diner across the street, go back to my room, and read my dad's letter before bed. I'd unfold it carefully, like it was something fragile. I kept the letter folded in my wallet. It kept me steady. After a few months, Keller started trusting me with small repair jobs. Fixing broken chair legs, sanding tabletops, replacing old joints. He watched me work one day and said, "You pay attention. Most kids don't." That was the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever given me. By the end of the year, I was doing fine joinery. Cabinet doors, dovetail joints, the kind of work that takes patience. Keller started letting me handle customers when he was busy. We never talked much about personal stuff, but one night when we were closing up, he said, "You work like someone with something to prove." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I guess I do." He nodded. "Truth has a way of finding daylight," he said. "You just have to last longer than the lie." That line stuck with me almost as much as my dad's. A few weeks later, I started building a table from scratch. Solid oak top, clean edges, no shortcuts. It was the first piece I designed myself. Every evening after work, I'd stay late to sand it, polish it, get every joint perfect. It wasn't for sale, it was for me. One morning, Keller was scrolling on his phone during a coffee break. He said, "You ever heard of some guy named Greg West?" My stomach tightened. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Why?" He turned the phone around. "He's all over social media, preaching about parenting. Looks like a clown." I glanced at the screen. It was Greg's face, mid-rant, talking about discipline and moral character. The comments were brutal. People mocking him, pointing out contradictions. Someone had found clips where he talked about family loyalty, then bragged about cutting off his stepson. I thought that was the end of it until a week later when Keller handed me his phone again. "This you?" he asked. It was a screenshot of a post from my old town's community board. A girl, Sophie's old friend Mia, had shared text messages from Sophie, bragging about getting Jake out of the house. In one, she'd written, "He'll never come back. My dad totally believes me." The post had hundreds of comments. Some people defended her, but most didn't. It spread fast. People started messaging me on social media, saying they were sorry for believing the wrong story. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. A week later, I got an email from my mom. It said, "I'm sorry. I didn't see it soon enough. Please talk to me." That was it. Short, quiet. I didn't reply. Around that time, the police from my hometown called. The officer said the case was officially closed. No charges, no open investigation. They'd verified Mia's screenshots of Sophie admitting she set me up. He said the ER documented no injuries consistent with what Sophie claimed. I thanked him, hung up, and went back to sanding the table. When Keller noticed I was working later than usual, he said, "You ever think about setting the record straight?" I told him I didn't know how. He said, "I know a guy. Lawyer. Owes me a favor." The next week, I sat across from that lawyer in a small office that smelled like paper and coffee. He looked through my notebook, the screenshots, and the text messages Mia had leaked. Then he said, You've got enough here for a defamation claim. We started with a demand letter. When they stalled, my lawyer filed a short complaint to keep deadlines alive. The letter demanded written apologies from Greg and Sophie, a public retraction, and compensation for the school term I had to withdraw from, the neighborhood gigs I lost after the police showed up, and emotional distress. He said, "Sometimes people like that fold fast when it's official." He was right. By June, Greg's online pages disappeared. Sophie posted a public apology saying she'd lied, and Greg posted a public retraction. 2 months later, they agreed to issue formal, notarized apologies as part of a stipulated settlement the court would enter. The story spread just as fast as the first one had. Their reputation fell apart overnight. I didn't feel triumph, just quiet relief. For the first time in years, I didn't have to defend myself. The truth finally spoke louder than the lie. That night, I stayed in the shop late and hung my dad's letter on the wall above my bench. The table I'd been building was close. Edges true, joints tight. I kept it for after hours. I ran my hand over the surface. It was smooth, solid, simple. For the first time since I could remember, I felt steady. Not angry. Not broken. Just solid. It had been almost a year since I left home when Laura showed up at the shop. I was sanding a chair leg when the bell above the door rang. I turned and froze. She stood there in a long gray coat, smaller than I remembered. Her face looked older, like she hadn't slept in months. "Hi, Jake," she said softly. I set the sandpaper down. "Hey." She looked around the shop. The work tables, the scent of varnish, the hum of tools. "You've built quite a life here," she said, her voice cracking a little. I just nodded. "Greg's gone," she said. "I left him." I didn't answer. Sophie finally told the truth. She confessed everything, to the police, to her counselor. They found the messages and screenshots. "The investigation's over. It's all documented." She paused. "I came to tell you myself." I kept my tone even. "Why now?" She swallowed hard. "Because I should have done it a long time ago." I believed them. I thought keeping the peace was safer than asking questions. You were right about both of them. I ran my thumb along the table I was working on. "You didn't want to see it." She nodded, tears forming. "No, I didn't. I thought love meant staying. I didn't realize sometimes love means leaving." She wiped her face. "I'm sorry, Jake. I'm proud of you. You stood your ground even when we turned on you." Before I could reply, Keller came out from the back holding a box of nails. He looked at her, then at me. "You family?" She nodded. He grunted. "He's a good worker." Then he walked out again. She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something your dad would have said." "Maybe," I said. After a long pause, she added, "If you ever want to visit, that house isn't home anymore," I said. She froze, then nodded. "I know." She left quietly, the bell ringing one last time. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my lawyer in his downtown office. He had the final papers from the settlement on his desk. "The case is closed," he said. "Greg and Sophie both signed. Because Sophie was still under 18, Greg signed for her as guardian, and the court approved it. The entire process took just under 3 months. He pushed the file toward me, documents stamped and sealed. The header read, "False statements and defamation of character." Greg agreed to pay damages for my withdrawn school term, therapy costs, and lost work after the rumors spread. Both were required to issue formal apologies filed with the court. Sophie's statement read, "I fabricated multiple claims out of jealousy and anger toward my stepbrother, Jacob Miller. He never harmed or threatened me. My actions were dishonest and caused him serious damage. I'm deeply sorry." Greg's letter was brief. "I made false assumptions and acted recklessly in a way that defamed Jacob Miller's character. I regret my behavior and accept full responsibility." I stared at the pages, not smiling, not angry, just done. The lawyer leaned back. The DA didn't file criminal charges, but the civil claim was strong. Once her confession hit the record, they settled fast. They didn't want a trial. I asked, "Would I have won if we went to court?" He nodded, easily, but sometimes winning on paper isn't as good as closing the book. He was right. Greg's reputation collapsed overnight. His family discipline videos vanished from every platform. When the filings went public, people dug through his old clips and tore him apart. His employer suspended him after an ethics complaint tied to the case, and clients cut ties. Sophie disappeared from social media after posting her apology. Rumor was she switched schools and lost most of her friends. Even the ones who once defended her wanted nothing to do with her. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. That afternoon, Keller found me sitting outside with the papers in my lap. "All done?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Finally," he nodded. "So what are you going to do with that money?" I looked around the shop. "Upgrade this place. New sander, maybe fix the roof." He smiled. Good. Most people tear things down when they're angry. You built something instead. That stuck with me. Over the next month, I reinvested everything. I bought new tools, repaired the roof, repainted the walls, and ordered new signage. Miller and Keller Woodworks. When Keller saw it, he laughed. Guess you gave yourself top billing. Business picked up fast. Word spread about the young carpenter with a story that ended in truth. I didn't talk about it much, but somehow people always found out. They treated me differently. Not like a victim, but like someone who had survived. A few weeks later, Keller called me into the office. He dropped a folder on the desk. I'm not renewing this, he said, tapping the license. I'm retiring. You're serious? I asked. Dead serious. You can run this place. You've got good hands and a steady head. I'll still come around to check your math. I smiled. Deal. We signed a simple purchase agreement the next week. I took over the lease and the tools on a payment plan Keller insisted was friendly interest. That night, I stayed late finishing the oak table I'd started months earlier. The surface was smooth and solid, the kind of piece that would outlast me. I built it for myself, not anyone else. When I finished, I hung my dad's letter above the workbench. The paper was yellowed now, the ink fading, but the words still clear. Build things that last, even when people don't. The next morning, a young couple came to pick up a commission. The woman brushed her hand across the table and smiled. You can feel the work in it, she said. After they left, I stood there in the quiet shop as the sunlight hit the oak, catching the grain just right. I thought about everything. The lies, the nights alone, the long wait for truth. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like justice, earned the hard way. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and looked once more at my dad's letter. They tried to bury me in lies. I built something that outlasted them. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.